Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Driving and Dragons. I'm Daniel, and this channel is all about tearing things apart, analyzing their parts, and putting them back together again. Sometimes that's my own classic car. Sometimes it's a project car that I hope to give away to someone in the audience one day. And sometimes it's the games that we all love. In this series, 7 Keys to Effective TTRPG Design, we look under the hood at tabletop role-playing games and what sets the guys whose books end up on your shelves apart from the guys whose books don't even see purchase by their designer's own family and friends. These are the traits that are critical to giving a game that indescribable feeling of rightness, where things fit and the experience feels satisfying. Last time, I covered the first of the 7 keys, be well read. In that video, I pointed out that some version of this advice came from every successful designer I spoke to in one version or another, but that Alexander Macrease said it best: read broadly to be polymathic, but read deeply into the subject matter of your game. Today, we focus on the second part of that piece of advice, because the second key to successful TTRPG design is to know your niche. If you feel like this video adds to your understanding of what separates a decent game from one that stands out, or if you simply like these kinds of conversations and deep dives, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and as the algorithm picks this up and spreads it far and wide. As I mentioned above, I work on and drive cars for my voiceover backgrounds. And if you support the channel with your hard-earned dollars via super stickers, memberships, or Patreon, that money goes exclusively to support my goal of giving people cars that they can feel proud to park right out in front of their favorite gaming convention or local Cars and Coffee. Please remember that my Driving the Conversation stream is on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, normally. And each time I will have a gaming industry professional or successful game designer on the show to discuss the last key that we covered. The playlist is on the screen here and is linked in the description so that you can go back and see all this series has to offer. With that out of the way, let's talk about know your niche, what it means to know it, and why that is important when designing a game. Longtime viewers will know that I'm very big on defining my terms, so that seems as good a place to start as any. A niche is a specialized, specific segment of a broader ecosystem, be it a market, an interest, or a community. In the case of Key 2, it actually applies to any number of these three. What is most important is that you recognize what your niche is and if you, in fact, wish to be in a niche at all. For example, if you want your game to have broad general appeal, you would want to focus on taking the specialized mechanics of a given niche and softening them, while bringing in the elements of other styles of play so that it appeals to more people. And a great example of this is Shadow Dark. Kelsey Dionne's game is often the subject of debate about whether or not it's a modern game or an OSR game. Truth is, the Shadow Dark has softened OSR elements that have been fitted to a modern gaming chassis in order to create a game that remains the modern, generalized ease of play while it taps into the old-school niche player bases by bringing in just enough OSR feel to keep them engaged without sacrificing that modern, easy-to-play core. This is a designer who is understanding her niche in the market and finding ways to cater to that niche without sacrificing the broader player base in the process. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have designers like the RPG Pundit who make OSR games. He leans heavily into OSR mechanics, and he understands their strengths, weaknesses, appeals, and pain points, and he hones in on those to cater to a very specific niche in the hobby. He doesn't need to tap into the modern casual gamer market because he understands that he has a niche market that associates his games with a specific OSR feel, and they will buy his games on reputation alone so long as he never betrays that. In order to do either of these things, The designer absolutely must have a very firm understanding of what that segment values and what elements of the flagship games in those niches are considered the core design features. Now, this isn't just a market concept. Niches also extend and overlap. Some genres, such as science fiction or modern warfare, tend to favor wargaming style play. Theater of the mind is nowhere near as common as maps and minis in those kind of games. So if you're making a sci-fi game with mechanics designed around theater of the mind play, you have to ask yourself how you will get past the hurdle of not having the combat grids and miniatures rules that players of those games tend to favor. The reverse can be said about how much you should focus on tactical combat systems in a game that's built around urban fantasy or cosmic or eldritch horror or mystery and investigation. It isn't that you can't have these elements in an investigation game, but when you think of the majority of Call of Cthulhu or Vampire the Masquerade players, how many of them are rushing to paint their latest mini and plot out their character ability progression tree, versus how many are at the thrift store trying to find the perfect green crushed velvet suit jacket and skull cufflinks to match the 200-year backstory they have imagined for their vampire noble? Would the players in that niche not get more from a detailed life path system or a backstory element integration mechanic? In the most obvious ways, knowing your niche translates into knowing your genre as well. Regardless of the style of play you choose, writing a horror game that ignores building tension, dwindling resources, and increasing pressure is a recipe for failure. And you actually see this in the problems modern fantasy gaming faces. Fantasy is a genre built on the heroic. It's built on facing the impossible odds and succeeding with help from the divine or the arcane. It is about doing the impossible to save the world, or at least your piece of it, from the impossible. In fantasy, the mundane only exists to give us all a reference point against which to compare the fantastical. And what has modern gaming given us? The fantastical is mundane. Items that command the very firmament of the magical ley lines are for sale in a town of 500 people for 200 gold. Adventurers include things like going to a party and trying to talk to the princess trying to talk her into giving you a dance, rather than sneaking into the lair of a dragon that has the power to destroy nations to rescue her, and then having to face that terrible beast when you get caught. And the designers of these games wonder why the core of their customer base left them in droves over the years to be replaced with people who only want to indulge in the occasional power fantasy, the power fantasy which is for sale over there at Ye Olde Magic Item Shop, while playing out the fantasies of having actual social lives. Games that last a handful of sessions. Games that churn through their players at an alarming rate. Games that have GM burnout, and games that are completely alien to people who have a lifelong love of fantasy. Gary Gygax, when he created D&D, had a deep understanding of, in particular, pulp fantasy. Now, he was an avid wargamer, but he also knew what appealed to the fans of those stories. And as he developed the game, you can see the old wargaming unit maneuvers and hyper-specific weapons and armor rules start to fade away, being replaced with abstractions. You can see magics taking a long time to develop and having very limited uses in an adventure, which kept them special and fantastical. You can see mechanics that are deadly to give the player the feeling of the razor's edge between victory and a heroic death. You see even the most mundane monsters being something to fear. He knew his niche, and even when his mechanics were going through growing pains and his presentation was what we could very generously call unpolished, he still built a devoted and avid core of fantasy-loving gamers, and he built an empire on that foundation. The same can be said for Sandy Peterson and his decisions with Call of Cthulhu, or Mike Pondsmith and his style over substance approach to cyberpunk. If you don't understand the things that make your niche a niche, there is no way you can design your game to capitalize on it. So there you go. In markets, know your niche so you don't develop a quickly forgotten quirky curiosity. In playstyles, Know your niche to avoid tedious or uninteresting mechanics that work but don't jive with your players or the genre. And in genres, know your niche so your game reflects the core experiences and feelings fans of those genres show up to have. And while you're at it, hop on over to Lulu and grab a copy of Corvid Codex Volume 1. My team of TTRPG enthusiast writers and artists certainly know our niches, and whether you like fantasy, sci-fi, cyberpunk, space adventure, or sword and sorcery, we have stories for you in the 168 pages of the first volume of our pulp anthology. Don't miss it when I have Vicky and Dean, designers of Untold Destiny and founders of Everray Games, on to discuss knowing your niche on Driving the Conversation. And I'll see you guys next time.